Season's greetings, everyone, and welcome back into the next episode of the Eden to Eden podcast. It's so good to see you all. You all look lovely. Yes, even you look lovely. Hey, we are discussing the death of Jesus today, the implications of it, some of the biblical takeaways. So we're going to get right into the execution or the crucifixion of Jesus. And per the usual, we've got our Joe. Now it's time to go. Season's greetings indeed. I suppose it's the Easter season. You know, I kind of just have sort of the default of saying season's greetings, and I suppose Easter is around the corner, so we could say that. It's also the season of everything at my house breaking. I don't know what's going on with my my refrigerator. It has stopped producing ice. It makes a sound, an audible sound that rivals the decibel level of a Chinook helicopter. Is a Chinook, is that a kind of helicopter? I don't know. I'm not up to date on my helicopter vernacular. My refrigerator is loud. That's what I'm trying to say. Our dishwasher has an odor that is similar to spoiled eggs, which I know is not what you're looking to hear right now, especially if you are by chance eating eggs or anything. But it doesn't smell great. It's not really cleaning our dishes either. I don't know what sort of germs and bacteria we're ingesting when we continue to use these plates, but I got to fix the refrigerator. I got to fix the dishwasher. And we've also around here, you know, spring is springing. And what do you do in the springtime? You go and buy flowers. And the problem with my wife and I's long history of killing botanical things, I suppose, is that we take something beautiful, and our intentions are always beautiful as well. But when we plant them, they tend to shrivel and die within the matter of days. So, for example, this is a recording that is happening in about mid-April. And it's the middle of April in Texas. We're used to it being to the 90s by now. Last night it froze. So as soon as we plant these somewhat expensive flowers to make our front yard look good and to just not be those people on our street. People on our street seem to have all taken a class to take care of botanical things in their front yard, and it looks great. And then we try here, but it doesn't work. And now everything's dying. Excuse me. Okay, now I'm ready. Thank you. Welcome back, me. But anyways, we're going to continue to try to support life in these flowers and plants and bushes that we've got in our front yard. But even our plants, along with our dishwasher and our refrigerator, they're going out, and I feel bad for everything. So I need to get it in gear around here. It's also the season of workouts and healthy eating. So today is day one. I got to get back, not back into shape. I got to get into shape. That's what I'll say. So today is day one of healthy eating. Look, I'm gonna need all of you out there listening and or watching. I'm gonna need you to keep me accountable. Okay. So hopefully over the next 3 or 4 episodes, you see me diminish in a healthy fashion. Before long, I might even be like cut, chiseled. I might need to extend the length of these shirts in the bicep and tricep area so I don't just bust through them. No, that won't happen. I just want to be, slightly less jiggly when I walk around. I don't foresee myself ever being cut, swole, or chiseled in any fashion. But I do need all of you out there, however many of you are watching, to keep me accountable. Okay. I mentioned just a second ago, if you're watching, if you weren't familiar with this or you didn't know, there is a video product to this podcast as well. And so if you do want to see me diminish over the next few weeks, might I recommend you head on over to YouTube, Eden to Eden Ministries. And I don't know how good I am at this whole podcasting thing, but I'll try to keep it updated on the video product. And so I realize some of you, like my wife, she prefers to watch things on YouTube, and as opposed to using Spotify or Apple Podcasts or something like that. So there is a video product. So if that tickles your fancy and floats your boat and all that, head on over to the YouTubes and you can see and hear this podcast all the same. we are continuing on in our, but that was a long intro. That was 5 minutes and now 1 second of an intro, and we've talked about nothing. But we're bonding. We're having a good time here. No, I'm having a good time. Anyways, we're continuing on in our Passion Week narrative, and we're bringing out some of the biblical things and going through the stories of Jesus and his final day and leading up to his death and resurrection. We started this whole ordeal in the Garden of Gethsemane. We pulled out a lot of implications of that, but namely that Jesus is taking care of his disciples, and he is the one remaining in charge and in control, and assuring that the plan of the Father goes off the way it should be going. And so we did pull out that completion is on its way in the death and resurrection of Jesus, because of how ratcheted up that number 3 shows up in the garden and on through his death and resurrection. And then we did a whole podcast, honestly, about the betrayal and arrest of Jesus. And then last episode, we just talked about the trial of Jesus, what Jesus underwent with his trials. And now today, we're going to get to the actual execution, crucifixion of Jesus. And one of the things that I want to highlight from the last podcast, because I feel like it's something that is good to be reminded of for me, and then hopefully for you guys as well. We talked about it at my church as well. I kind of brought this up again, and we talked about it at my church yesterday. Excuse me. Spring allergies, I'm telling you, Texas. One of the thing that I brought up last episode that I want to bring up again is, are you compromising your own character or demeaning the sin in your life for the purpose of holding on to or gaining wealth, status, or power? So this was brought out in the trial of Jesus with Caiaphas, Annas, the chief priests, and the other members of the Jewish officials, or the Sanhedrin. How literally I pointed out that at least 7 Jewish laws were broken and 3 Roman laws were broken in order to get Jesus the death penalty. And literally, they're breaking their own laws in order to get Jesus killed. And so they are committing these sins in order to accomplish something over here. And on the outskirt, we might look at that and say, how could they? How could they? But if we actually take a step back and think about it, we can maybe see some of that happening in our own lives. So maybe we're not treating this particular set of sins in our life that we're committing. Maybe we just don't see them as that big a deal, so we continue on. Hey, I'm doing these 2 or 3 things over here, but I'm not doing these things over here. When in reality, that shows a lack of faith and a poor heart condition if we're willing to compromise on sin at all. And so the Jewish officials were looking to hold on to whatever they could in order to maintain their level of wealth, status, and power, influence, however you want to put it. And even Caiaphas himself says, if we don't do something about Jesus quickly, they're all going to run after him and follow him, and nobody will be left to follow us. So they want to hold on to their wealth, their power, and their influence and their status. And so my question to you is, are you giving every single part of your life to Jesus for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of being a kingdom citizen? Are you hurting others? Are you lying to others? Are you doing anything that is ungodly to others for the sake of you maintaining control, for the sake of you holding on to your wealth, your status, your power, your influence? And so we can see ourselves somewhat in the eyes, through the eyes of the Jewish officials here, because even if we take a step back, we might could see how sometimes we do act like they do. And so may the Lord be able to chisel that away from you in the process of sanctification, which sanctification is just a term that is meant to be used that we are being made more and more into the likeness of Christ. We are learning more about his word and how he's communicated to us. And in doing so, we're learning that sin has a cost to it. The wages of sin is death, unless you have put your faith in Jesus and embarked upon that process of sanctification. And so my hope for you as we go through this is, one of the hopes is that you actually start to see in your own life where you can get rid of some things or put to death some things in your life for the purpose of being made more and more into the likeness of Christ. And so especially doing all of those things so that you can properly give Jesus the status he deserves, the influence and power he deserves, and so on and so forth. And so as we progress into it, I'm going to bring up a couple of more points like that. But let's get right into it after a drink of coffee, of course. Where I've got my Colorado mug today. I've got some family in Colorado. I've got some friends in Colorado. It's easy to see the beauty of the Lord when you go to Colorado. It is quite beautiful. I wouldn't mind living in Colorado someday. That would be lovely. But we're going to get right into it. I'm going to quickly read. I do want you to hear the words so that as we unpack and sort of go through the passage here, you're not just grasping at straws as to like, what is he referencing here? So I do want you to hear it. I'm going to read quickly. I'm going to read in Mark 15. I'm going to start in 21. It says, they pressed into service a passerby coming from the country, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Not enough Rufuses in the world. Rufuses? Rufusi? Rufuses. We need more people named Rufus in the world. That's a strong name right there. I was discussing this with my wife recently. I said, in the event that we are ever with child again, and that child that we are with is of the male status, we will name him Rufus. And it's, with the exception of a miracle done by God, it's impossible to get pregnant again. So I think she's just agreeing with it. She's like, yeah, we can, if we have another child, we can name him Rufus. So I got that going for me. All right. Rufus. And so Simon is going to bear the cross for Jesus. Then they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which translated means place of the skull. They tried to give him a wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots for them to decide what each man should take. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified two robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. And as the scripture, struggling with that one today, was fulfilled, which says, and he was numbered with transgressors. Those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ha, you are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes, were mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross, so that we may see and believe those who were crucified with him were also insulting him." When the 6th hour came, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi," or Eloi, Eloi, "lama sabachthani," which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they began saying, "Behold, he is calling for Elijah." Someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave him a drink, saying, "Let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion who was standing right in front of him saw the way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." There were also some women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the Less, and Joseph, and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they used to follow him and minister to him, and there were many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark, for unpacking that. So it was common practice for Roman executions, if you were dying via crucifixion. It was often part of the process where you would carry at least the crossbeam of the cross to the place in which you were going to be executed. Jesus's crucifixion is not, in practical sense and logistical in the way it was carried out, it's not abnormal. Romans were crucifying people all the time. We'll talk more about that here in a second. Now, Jesus' crucifixion, for obvious reasons, is quite a bit different than other crucifixions. However, this was something that Romans, especially Roman executioners, became quite good at. And so it was common for the robbers, the brigands, whoever was being crucified, to carry the crossbeam to the place in which they were going to actually be crucified. And so in this particular case, they are going to a place called Golgotha, which translated means place of the skull. And we don't really 100% know why it's called the place of the skull. It could be that there was some sort of structure or rock formation that resembled a skull. I've heard that. There could be because so many deaths took place at this location that there were skeletons and therefore a bunch of skulls laying around. I'm not sure if Jews who were very weird about death and all that would have stood for that and been seen and been around in such places. We don't really know. However, we can associate this with the place of death. And I want to at least bring that to the forefront for the moment because Jesus is always going to the devil's playground, so to speak. And here's what I mean. I was a coach for a long time. I coached for 8 years, I think 8 years, something like that. I'm getting to that age where I don't really know anymore because I've done it for a while. But I was a coach for 8 years. And one of the best feelings that you could get, whether it be basketball, football, or some other sport, is going to your rivals or your opponent's stadium and beating them on their own turf. It's so gratifying. And it's such a cool thing to be going to their place and one up them and take the victory away from them. And so it's a neat feeling as a coach. You like being at home too, where you can celebrate and all that, but it's a cool feeling to go into your opponents or your foes' playground or their stadium or whatever and beat them at their own game. And when Jesus is baptized, it's very curious that he goes out into the wilderness. The wilderness, the desert, essentially the same kind of field that ancient Israel roamed around in for 40 years. And it's meant to be the opposite of the Garden of Eden. So in the Garden of Eden, where mankind was originally supposed to interact in some degree, whether they lived there or just went in there sometimes, we don't know. But the garden is a luscious, life-giving, beautiful place that's full of life and growth and prosperity. The wilderness is meant to be the exact opposite. It's dry, it's arid, nothing grows, nothing is alive out there. Pretty good chance of you dying out there. So the exact opposite. So when Jesus goes into the wilderness, whenever he's being tempted by Satan, he goes into the wilderness. He's reclaiming that sort and redeeming that sort of prospect of Israel wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. And so Jesus goes out in the wilderness for 40 days, and he is basically fulfilling and acting in a way Israel was supposed to. But it's also, he's going into, quote unquote, the devil's playground. It's the opposite of the Garden of Eden. And I'm not saying, don't read in too far to what I'm not really saying, but we're meant to see that Satan is out there where death is, destruction, nothing, no life, nothing grows, nothing prospers. And Satan is out there tempting Jesus. And Jesus goes out there and claims victory from Satan himself. He does not give in to temptation. He remains faithful to the Father's plan. He quotes scripture properly. And as a result, he reclaims that territory, so to speak, and he bests Satan at his own game in his territory. Now, here at Golgotha, what we see is the place of the dead. It's really this. It's translated place of the skull. We don't really know 100% why, but we can surmise that quite a bit of death takes place here. And so really, this is another symbolic representation of Jesus going into Satan's playground, so to speak, and he is conquering death in the place of death. He's besting Satan once again in what he's doing here. Now, above all, ancient Roman crucifixions were a political tactic. They were indeed, I don't even want to say obviously they were an effective way to put someone to death, but they weren't effective at immediately doing so. We see Jesus's case, they actually were surprised at how quick he dies, but it seems to reason, or we can stand to reason, that he took quite a bit more suffering than anybody else at the time whenever he was hung on the cross. But crucifixions were a political tactic by Rome that's the number one reason why crucifixions were done. And so it was a political tactic because it showed for everybody a gruesome and awful way that you might meet your end should you go against the Roman Empire in any fashion. Should you commit treason in any way, should you do anything that harms the effectiveness and peace of Rome, this will be what your destination is. And so as you're going in and out of the city, it was common for people to be crucified along the path or the road that's going in and out of the city. So when you're coming in, you're reminded, I better act right while I'm in the city because I don't want this to happen to me. And it was meant to be a humiliation tactic as well as a political tactic. And they're working in tandem there. And so by humiliation, it was very common, mostly common, to be crucified in the nude. And so you are literally stripped of every bit of dignity you have. Literally everything you have is laid bare, and you were crucified naked. And so you were humiliated, you were in pain, you were in agony, and we'll talk more about the outworkings of the crucifixion in a moment. But it was a good reminder that this is not something that I want to happen to me. And as a result, I'm going to act right. I'm not going to buck against the system of Rome. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to. And so when you carried the crossbeam of the cross to your place of location, you were either strung up with your hands and feet by rope, or you were nailed. Now, some of this you may have heard, but it stands to reason that if you were see, look, you can't. I don't. It's definitely if you're listening on the audio, you can't see this obviously. But if you are watching on the video, it's kind of going away. But I've got a little scab right here, actually right in the palm of my hand. I didn't even realize I didn't put this together. But right here, if you were to put a nail through there and set me up on a cross for a long time, eventually there's really nothing there. A finger bone maybe, but it's going to break through there. I would slip right off the cross. And so the Greek word, I believe this is accurate. The Greek word for wrist is the same as hand. And so if you feel in your wrist, you've got your radius and your ulna. Now, I used to be, going back to my need to eat right and work out again, I used to be fitter than I am now. I played high school sports. And this is just letting you into a little bit of my personal life, a little bit of vulnerability for you all. The last play of my football career when I was in high school, I was playing quarterback. I was a starting quarterback for my team. But I was also, if you know anything about football, I was also on the kickoff team. Usually not a good idea to put your starting quarterback on special teams, but hey, it's high school. We did this kind of thing. Let's go. And so I was on the kickoff team. I'm running down to try to make a tackle, and an enormous gentleman, I call him a gentleman, an enormous fella, just obliterated me to no end. And I lost all sense of balance, fell backward right onto my wrist here. And in one fell swoop, in one play, the last play of my football career, I mean, I didn't make any money off of it, but you know what I mean? I broke my radius, I broke my ulna, and I dislocated my ring finger all on my right hand. That all happened in one place. So I go to the hospital, and that was when I first felt the feeling of morphine. Okay, I'm 36 years old. This happened 18, 20 years ago, something like that. And I can still remember the feeling of that morphine going into my body, where it just completely sent away any fear of hurt, anxiety, nothing. I just didn't feel anything at that point. And I darn sure didn't know my wrist was hurting still. And I just remember I broke both these bones and dislocated this finger. I remember the doctor pulling on my hand, my broken hand, to reset everything. And I was like, dude, this is the craziest thing that I've ever felt, because I'm not actually feeling anything. And so I can remember, like, how does this not hurt? How does this not, but like, it was just the weirdest feeling. And I can't even imagine for 1 second a spike or a nail of some kind going through those two bones, and my radius and my ulna just resting on a metal iron spike. And so it gives me the jimblies. It makes me go jimbly wimbly, just thinking thinking about that. But this is often the case, what would have happened under Roman crucifixion. And more about the morphine coming up here in a second. But and so recent archaeology, relatively recent archaeological uncoverings has found an ancient, this is wild, I'm pretty sure this is found to be true. We found an ancient skeletal bone of, well, I guess it's just the heel bone with a metal spike going through the foot bone. And this was found I think it was found in Italy. And so we have an uncovering of a roughly 2,000-year-old crucifixion proof, evidence, that spikes were used to go through the foot, and it's pretty amazing. And so the word crucifixion, it actually, if you trace it on through the line, it's a Latin word that we get our word for excruciating. Maybe you've heard of that. Excruciating, that word that we use to, that just says, this doesn't pain, this doesn't hurt, I'm not just in pain, this is excruciating. And I think I really have only had 2 times in my life where I have had excruciating pain, what I would deem excruciating. I've never given birth. Spoiler, I've never done that. I hear that's number 1. That is something that I will never experience, the process of giving birth. So I'm going to let you have that one, ladies out there. I'm pretty sure that would count as excruciating. But I have broken my radius and ulna. And then there was a time when remember, I'm in the education sphere. I do what I can to connect with the kids, encourage them spiritually, culturally, emotionally, like I do what I can. And the only other time I've broken a bone was when I was jump roping with some students. We all went outside and we were having ourselves a time, and I was learning to double Dutch. And so I jumped in there, and it took me a long time to actually get to the process of getting in there. And I was doing it, and everybody was cheering, Coach Presley, you're doing it. Woo! Yeah. And then unbeknownst to me, hey dudes are not the hey dudes are the little slip-on shoes, so you can't tie them or anything. Those do not bode well for double dutching. And so when I came down, hey dude went that way, ankle went that way, broke my foot in front of all the students, and I just kind of had to be cool about it. And so literally the rest of the day, I put my foot up on my desk and I told all my students, listen, we ain't doing nothing today. Y'all just let Coach Presley just kind of be here till the end of the day. And so those are the only 2 times that I think I've been in excruciating pain. But we get our word excruciating from the word crucifixion. And so it literally kind of just shows that this is a new level of pain. Now, if there are any Harry Potter nerds out there, now listen, if you are a parent or a person who's like, no, that's sorcery, that's of the devil, that's not a question, that's not a debate we're having right now. But in the event that I am appealing to any Harry Potter nerds out there, there's the Cruciatus curse, which comes from the word excruciating. And that curse there, once you put it on, look, did you see I even did the little flippy with the wand and stuff? That's why you got to get on the video product here, guys. You're missing me trying to do a Harry Potter thing here. But the Cruciatus curse is meant to not kill somebody, but you do that to inflict severe ultimate pain upon somebody. Even our boy Cicero, who's an ancient historian, not necessarily historian, but an ancient literary person. He was a writer, a thinker, an important person of the day. This is a quote from Cicero. So 2,000-year-old Cicero's got this to say. He said, let the very word cross be, or crucifixion, something like that, crux, crucifixion, be far removed from not only the bodies of Roman citizens, but even from their thoughts, their eyes, and their ears. And so Cicero's saying, like, we need to be careful. We don't even need to think about it, because that's how gruesome and awful it was. And so we have Cicero who's saying, look, don't even think, which, makes us think about it. He's saying, don't even think about it. You think about it. That's how it works. But that's how gruesome it was. Even our boy Cicero here was saying, like, it's too hard to even think about, let alone be there to witness. But it was common for a Roman executioner, one who was in charge of crucifying, or actually doing the beating or driving the nails or stringing someone up. It was common for them to collect the belongings of the one being killed. Now, just for the sake of time here, we're already at 30 minutes and I've got a lot to get through. But for the sake of time here, I do want you to I have homework for you. I want you to read Psalm 22. Like I said, I pastor a house church that meets in our home. And I have encouraged the people of our house church to read Psalm 22 every day this week. And as you do, you can look and see that this is a highly prophetic psalm that is about Jesus. Some people think that David, if David is the one that wrote it, we can find David in there, but I don't know that it's actually fully about David, even if David wrote it. We see things in there like, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's a beautiful psalm, which starts very oddly. That's how the psalm starts. And you're thinking, boy, this is going to be real somber and sad. And it kind of is. But by the end of the psalm, Psalm 22, by the end of it, there's a champion arising that is taking care of business. And so the psalmist has reason to celebrate. And so we're seeing the psalmist turn. Why have you forsaken me? And then he takes a step back. And I want everybody to listen. The psalmist starts with, why have you forsaken me, God? But then he takes a step back and begins to remind himself that God has been active and faithful in the lives of Israel and in the psalmist's life. And so he's using logic and scripture to encourage his spirit. And it leads him to the conclusion that this situation is no different. God will prevail and he will take care of me. So those of you listening right now who are struggling right now with something in life, you're struggling with loss, you're struggling with career things going on that are seemingly harmful. You're struggling with friends. You're struggling with faith. You're struggling with money. Whatever the case may be, fill in your struggle. And we can be transparent. This might be a time in life where you're thinking, I don't know if God actually sees me, hears me, or knows the strife that I'm going through. Might I highly recommend you to read Psalm 22 every day this week, because the psalmist is feeling the same way that you're feeling right now. But the psalmist is using logic and reason to say, I've never not had God come through for me before in his own way. And so we see the psalmist is saying, I feel like God has forsaken me, but I know that can't be the case. And he goes on to champion the cause of God accomplishing the plan of redemption that he is staying faithful to. So can I encourage you in that? Like, it doesn't necessarily make it easier, but it is comforting to the soul to remind you that God has always taken care of you before. You know how I know that? Because you're here. You're listening to me right now talk, which means that God has brought you through hard things before. And I would encourage you to adopt the mindset of the psalmist in Psalm 22, who's directly pointing to how this is going to be overtaken is because Jesus is not going to succumb to temptation. Jesus is not going to take the easy route, but rather he, who has been tested and gone through trials in the same way you have, is going to endure to the cross for the purpose of redeeming you back to himself and put you in relationship with the Father again. And so I hope that's an encouragement to you. Jesus continues to show full control as he's hanging on the cross because he surrenders his spirit. It's not that the Romans come by and actually break his leg or they actually kill him, but rather he surrenders his spirit to the Father. Now, there is a lot to unpack here, but for the sake of time, again, I want to make sure that we don't go too far into this. So I'm going to speed it up just a little bit. Before he does surrender his spirit, he is offered this wine mixed with myrrh. Now, at some point, we're going to do a quick run through about Jesus's beginning of his life through the end of his life. Let me rephrase that. I'm going to show the similarities between his birth and his death. Obviously, we can study all the things in between, but there's a remarkable similarity between his birth and his death. And we're going to cover a lot of this at his resurrection. So that'll be for the next podcast. We've still got two after this one, the resurrection of Jesus. And then I'm actually going to incorporate the road to Emmaus as a separate podcast to wrap up Passion Week, to wrap up the whole thing of what we've been studying with Jesus. However, Jesus is being hung on a cross and he's offered this wine mixed with myrrh. And that's an obvious one. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh were at his birth, and those were the gifts of the Magi. And now here is the potential to have myrrh. Now, there was we quoted Cicero, but there was another gentleman who was in the Greek world, in the Roman world, I think this was, don't quote me on this, was about 50 to 100 years before Jesus' death. However, what he did is he was a Greek doctor, much like Luke. However, Luke was a follower of Jesus. This gentleman here, I don't know that he was actually a follower of Jesus. But what he did is he was a doctor by trade, and that's what he enjoyed doing. And so this gentleman here, we have writings of this. We have historical evidence to show. What he did was he experimented with all these medicinal things. And he brought in, he didn't have the modern medicine of today, modern technology of today. But what he did is he pulled in about 600 different plants from all over the Roman Empire. And he was doing these medical tests. So he would bring in this plant, put them together. he would bring in these spices and these herbs and bring them all together. And he experimented using over 600 different kinds of plants, herbs, and things like that. And he produced over 1,000 different variations of drugs, different kinds of medicines. And this is just what he enjoyed doing. This was his profession. This is what he was passionate about, to produce over 1,000 different kinds of medicines, drugs, etc. And one of the findings that this has been around for a while, but one of the things that he really wrote a lot about is the narcotic effect of myrrh. So if you have enough myrrh, which is this sort of incense type of thing, if you had enough myrrh in it, it would dumb down the pain quite a bit. It acted as a narcotic. And so Jesus is offered this wine mixed with this myrrh, which would have been a real sympathetic and compassionate thing for the Roman officials to offer, for the Roman soldiers to offer him, because it would have acted as that narcotic that it would have given. I don't know that it would have had the same effect that morphine had on me that day, because here we are 18, 20 years later, and I still remember that feeling. But it would have helped tremendously with the pain that Jesus was experiencing, and he declined. He wanted to bear the full brunt of sin and wrath. He did not want to take the easy way out. He did not want to become numb to that pain, but rather he wanted to endure it on our behalf. And so this was this is fascinating. He had the cognizance and mental awareness not to take that, but he wanted to endure the full brunt of pain. And in addition to the physical pain that he's experiencing here, in verse 29 of our passage, Mark 15:29, those passing by were hurling abuse at him. The word that is actually used there is they were blaspheming him. And remember, this is the very thing that got him on the cross to begin with. Was, you heard him. We don't need witnesses anymore, Caiaphas says. We've heard blasphemy come straight from his mouth, and here they are, in an ironic twist, they are blaspheming Jesus. And so this abuse that they're hurling at him is actually they are committing the very act that they condemn Jesus to. And so at the end of this, we always got to go over to John for a little bit. I'll be careful of time, but we got to go over to John for a little bit. And I'm going to read in John chapter 19. This is just further evidence that Jesus is fully committed to redeeming the people whom he created and he loves. In John chapter 19, verse 26, it says, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, behold your mother. From that hour, the disciple took her into his own household. And after this, blah, 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 blah. And so in the ancient world, it was not an abnormality for a man to call a woman. It's not. Now, if I called my wife woman nowadays in 21st century modern American Western world context and culture, that she's not going to take too kindly to that. Therefore, I shall indeed abstain from saying woman and then follow that with whatever. I know better than that. I'm not going to do that. But in ancient world, in the first century, especially a Jewish and Greco-Roman context, it was not uncommon for someone to refer to a woman as a woman. That was very cultural, apropos for the day. I don't know if I used that right. If I didn't, sorry. It was the cultural norm. I'll say that. We're too far into this whole thing for me to redo it, so I'm just going to keep it as that. But it was normal in that culture to call somebody woman. However, I want to read a Ben Witherington quote here, if I can find it. It is culturally acceptable for him to call her woman, but there is something else going on here. If we look in even our own Bibles, we often hear the cross referred to as a tree. In fact, this is spoken of very pejoratively, negatively in the Old Testament. Cursed is him who hangs on a tree. When we get into this context, we often, even in our songs, we substitute the word cross for tree sometimes in our songs that we sing. We see it in our Bibles. We see the cross is often referred to as a tree. And so here we have a man and a woman, not married, but the two are not married. One of them is Mary. Woman, behold your son, meaning that there is at the foot of the cross, which is often associated to as a tree, we have a woman. And with her is a man, the disciple whom Jesus loved. And we won't get into who this disciple is right now. It's not important for right now. I think it is important. And I think there's a lot of fun conversations we can have as to who is this disciple. But needless to say, we've got a man and a woman together in this particular context at the foot of a tree or at the base of a tree. And so Ben Witherington III, I mean, he just sounds like a smart guy. Ben Witherington III. I'm sure his name is Benjamin. It doesn't get any more studious than that. Benjamin Witherington III. The only more studious name I can think of is Rufus. There we go. We're back to Rufus. I got to have a Rufus one day. Anyways, Ben Witherington says here, quote, "The dignity of woman is being restored beneath this tree." And his referent is twofold. A, the dignity of woman is being restored because of what Eve lost at the foot of a tree. But B, as a cultural norm of the day, women were second-class citizens. They were viewed as highly important, but comparatively to men, they weren't allowed to be students of a rabbi. They weren't allowed to participate in the court judicial system. They weren't allowed to go into as many places of the temple as men could. And so what he's doing here is he's saying that the dignity of woman is being restored beneath the tree, both redemption of what Eve has done, and she is being, continued quote here, and she is being portrayed as one who can become a full disciple of Jesus. This is amazing, picking this out of this passage. So we have the disciple whom Jesus loved, and we have a woman together at the base of a tree, the base of the cross, and woman is being restored and redeemed. And in a sense, through the power of the cross and the atonement, everybody has redemption through this. It's fascinating what's going on here. And gosh, Jesus is just so good, because in the ancient world, Mary needed to be taken care of. From the sounds of things, she is a widow. And we know that Jesus has many brothers and sisters. And we also know that he's not welcomed in his own town. His family is not even fully, at this point in time, his family is not fully bought into who he is, other than his mom. And so really, the way Jesus wants his mother Mary to be taken care of cannot be accomplished by his brothers and sisters. And so what we actually see here is in his true, this is again from Witherington. I've utilized quite a few sources for the podcast material as a whole. Maybe one day I'll get into the different resources if you would like to look into any of these. But another Witherington quote is, "True to his principles, and perhaps especially since his brothers did not believe in him, Jesus apparently preferred to have his mother cared for by a member of the family of faith rather than by his own physical family, for his own received him not," end quote. And so the disciple whom Jesus loved, who is also at the foot of the tree, helping women and men be restored to dignity and honor, Jesus is entrusting him to now take care of and look after his own mother. And so what actually is happening here is the atonement. Again, we could spend 10 podcasts just about the death and resurrection of Jesus. But going back to last episode, where we had two sons of the Father on display, one of them was Bar Avas, or Bar Av, meaning son of the Father, Barabbas. The other is the true son of the Father. And they're both here, and one of them can go free, and one of them's got to be sacrificed in true Old Testament form, where one goat or one sacrifice could go free, the other one's got to be slaughtered. And so we kind of see ourselves in Barabbas here. So Barabbas was the scapegoat. In the Old Testament, they would lay their hands on one of them and have them, symbolically, that one would be freed, carrying the sins of Israel away. And that's what we're kind of seeing in Barabbas here. We're seeing ourselves like, because of the death that's about to come, we can go free. Our sins are carried away. But Jesus remains, and he becomes the sacrifice. The sacrifice and the death that we deserve because of our sin and our separation from the Father, in our rebellious ways, and in all the ways that we act like Barabbas, and in all the ways that we act like Adam and Eve and Cain and so on. We act in those ways ourselves. And Caiaphas, and we can go on and on about, we are a lot like these people that we are looking down at, but we are a lot like them. In our words, thoughts, and actions, we do hurt people. In our words, thoughts, and actions, we act rebellious. We act prideful. We shake our fists at God, whether physically, sometimes we're like, I don't understand this, or metaphorically, we're shaking our fists at God, letting him know that if God would see things our way, it would go a lot better. We see ourselves in all these people, but Jesus remains quiet. He remains faithful to the plan that the Father has laid out. And as a result, he breathes his last and surrenders his spirit to the Father. It is finished, is what he says. And so we can see the true gospel message at work here. Now, the gospel, that's a loaded term. We see the gospel even at Jesus's birth. For behold, I bring to you the good news, the gospel. But we see it culminating, the crux of the whole Bible story is about the death and resurrection of Jesus, which crux means cross. The crux of the story is the cross. That word crux means cross. And so if you are struggling to articulate a true meaning of the definition of the gospel, which I would love a page to be able to give you the gospel. But if you just need a quick thing about what is the gospel, this is something you can memorize. This is helpful. This is just what if I had to put the gospel in one sentence, one quick snapshot of what is the gospel, it's this. The gospel is God getting involved in the lives of sinners to be their sacrifice, and so that they can have a proper restored relationship again with the Father. Now, that's simplistic. The gospel is complex, but it's also the gospel is very simple. And so we could get into, well, why do we need to be redeemed and restored? Well, so we can get into all that, but the gospel is God getting involved in the lives of sinners and becoming the sacrifice, becoming our sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, whereby we can believe in his name and have restored relationship with the Father. One more time. This is just so good to be able to memorize and to be able to I hate the word regurgitate, but regurgitate this in the event that a neighbor or a coworker or a colleague asks us, what is the gospel? The gospel is God getting involved in the lives of sinners to be their sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice whereby we can believe in his name and have restored relationship with the Father. And in doing so, I mean, that's just in quote there from Michael Presley there. In doing so, Jesus is embodying the full Jewish law here. Jesus is the temple. Jesus is our high priest. Jesus is the sacrifice. He is the entire sacrificial Jewish temple law system, everything on our behalf, so that we can go straight to the Father, so that we can go straight to the Father and have that relationship that Adam and Eve have. Before, in the temple, you had one room, the Holy of Holies, where one man could go once a year. It's very exclusive. One room, the Holy of Holies, where God's presence was, where one man could go once a year. But when Jesus surrenders his spirit to the Father and declares it is finished, the veil is torn, which separates everybody from the presence of God. And now the gospel message, because of the death and resurrection, and really the ascension, but there's a lot of technical stuff there. Because of all that, it's not just for one man, one time a year in one room. It's for everybody at all times of the year, everywhere you want to go. And so even the beauty of in my Father's house, there are many rooms where we can all have our own rooms, so to speak, with God in the presence of him forever. It's not one room for one man. In my Father's house, there are many rooms, and you can all be a part of this if you just believe in the gospel message. If you just surrender your life to him, and if you get baptized and receive the Holy Spirit, you can be a part of this whole thing that God is doing. And so it is the gospel message that we celebrate here at the Easter time, here at the Easter season. And so please go in peace with that. Please go in peace with the way we started. Are you giving in to these little sins, or are you knowingly partaking of these little sins for the sake of bolstering your own status, power, wealth, and so on? Please let the Lord just chisel those away from you, because it will bring you ultimate joy to surrender to his will. And then the second thing, for those of you that are feeling very Psalm 22, or Jesus who's quoting it, saying, God, I don't know if you're with me in this season of life. I don't see you active in my life right now. And it's not a shaking your fist at the heavens sort of thing. It's just, making your request known to God. I'm struggling right now and I'm failing to see how you're involved. But then take a step back as the psalmist does. Take a step back as the psalmist does and remind yourself, well, I have had hard things before in life and God has seen me through every one of them. So don't go through this hard season and then look back thinking to yourself, boy, I did not have much faith during that hard season, did I? Go through this season fully surrendered to God through community. Go get into a community who can bear the burdens with you, but go through this season so that you can look back on it and say, I'm sure glad I trusted the Lord during this time. He has gotten me through it, and I know he will the next time I go through a hard season. And so please go with that in peace. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is, if you're struggling still in that same thing to see God, at least you can read the story knowing that he went to the cross for you. He went to the cross to please the Father, to glorify the Father, and to partake obediently in the plan that God has laid out. But it stands to reason still that he desperately cares for you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone to the cross. And so please be encouraged with that. 50 minutes. Oh boy, that's the girthy. That is indeed a girthy time to spend on a podcast. However, I think I came in a little under from last time's episode. So, hey, until next time, when we get into the resurrection of Jesus, may you go in peace. I love you guys. And as always, I'm going to go get some more coffee.